Sometimes the person you think you know best becomes a complete stranger overnight, and the life you thought was solid crumbles like sand through your fingers. This is Sarah's story, but it could be any of ours, because love, betrayal, and the courage to walk away are experiences that touch so many hearts. What would you do if the person you trusted most asked you to step aside while they explored their feelings for someone else? Sarah's answer might surprise you, and her journey might just remind you of your own worth. Sarah Martinez had always believed in the quiet strength of steady love. At 33, she thought she had figured out the secret to a lasting relationship, built brick by brick with patience, understanding, and the kind of everyday kindness that doesn't make headlines but makes life bearable. Her marriage to David felt like coming home every single day, a safe harbor in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. They had met 9 years ago when life still felt full of endless possibilities. When she was 24 and fresh out of graduate school with a psychology degree, working her first real job as a counselor at a community center. David was 25 then, just starting his journey as an architect, full of dreams about designing homes that would shelter families and create memories for generations to come. Their love story began the way many do, at a friend's housewarming party in downtown Portland, Oregon. Sarah remembers standing by the kitchen island, watching people laugh and connect over cheap wine and homemade appetizers, when this tall, gentle-eyed man approached her. David had noticed her because she was listening, really listening, to an older gentleman who was telling stories about his grandchildren. While everyone else was caught up in their own conversations, Sarah was giving this man her full attention, asking questions about his family, making him feel seen. David later told her that was the moment he knew she was different, that she had a gift for making people feel valued. He approached her with a nervous smile and a comment about how she seemed to be the only person at the party who wasn't checking her phone every 5 minutes. She laughed and said she was just raised to believe that when someone is sharing their story, you honor it with your presence. From that first conversation, everything flowed naturally. David brought creativity and vision into Sarah's structured world, while she brought emotional depth and wisdom into his sometimes scattered artistic mind. He would sketch buildings on napkins while they talked, designing imaginary homes with perfect lighting and spaces that invited connection. She would share insights about human behavior, helping him understand how people move through spaces and what makes a house feel like a home. They complemented each other in ways that made both of them better versions of themselves. Sarah felt like she had found her person, someone who understood her need for meaningful connection and shared her belief that love was about choosing each other every single day. They married after 4 years of dating, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. Sarah wore her grandmother's pearl necklace and a simple white dress that made her feel beautiful without trying too hard. David cried when she walked down the aisle, not caring that his colleagues from the architecture firm were watching. The ceremony was intimate, filled with people who truly knew and loved them, not the obligatory guests that often populate larger weddings. Sarah's college roommate read a poem about how love is not just a feeling, but a choice, while David's best friend shared stories about how David would light up whenever Sarah's name came up in conversation. After the wedding, they settled into a cozy 2-bedroom craftsman house in the Selwood neighborhood, a place with character and good bones that David fell in love with the moment they walked through the front door. The house had hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, a kitchen with a window that looked out onto a small garden, and a front porch where they would sit together on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and planning their week. Sarah loved the way the afternoon light fell across their living room, and David loved the built-in bookshelves where Sarah displayed her collection of psychology textbooks alongside novels by authors who understood the human heart. For the first few years, their rhythm felt perfect. Sarah would come home from her work at the counseling center, often emotionally drained from helping people navigate their most difficult moments, and David would be there with dinner started and stories about his latest project. He had a way of making her laugh about the small absurdities of his day, like clients who insisted on putting bathrooms in completely impractical locations, or colleagues who treated architectural guidelines like mere suggestions. Sarah would share her own stories, carefully protecting her clients' confidentiality while finding ways to process the emotional weight of her work. David was a good listener, patient with her need to decompress, understanding that her job required her to give so much of herself that she sometimes had little left over at the end of the day. They talked about children sometimes, but never with urgency. Sarah wanted to feel more established in her career first, and David was focused on building his reputation at the firm. They both agreed that when the time was right, they would know. In the meantime, they were content to practice caring for living things with Sarah's collection of houseplants and a neighborhood cat named Oliver, who had essentially adopted them by showing up for dinner every evening. Their life felt stable and purposeful, filled with quiet joys and shared dreams that stretched comfortably into the future. Looking back now, Sarah wonders if their very contentment made them vulnerable to what came next. When you feel secure in love, you sometimes stop paying attention to the subtle shifts that signal change. You assume that the person sleeping beside you every night will always choose you, that the promises you made at an altar surrounded by people who loved you will be stronger than any temporary temptation. Sarah had always prided herself on being observant, on picking up the emotional undercurrents in any room, but somehow she missed the signs that her own marriage was beginning to shift beneath her feet. The catalyst for change arrived on a moving truck on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Sarah was getting ready for work, applying mascara in their bedroom mirror, when she heard the rumble of heavy machinery outside. Through the window, she could see men unloading furniture and boxes into the house next door. The Victorian that had been empty for 3 months since the elderly woman who lived there moved to assisted living. Sarah felt a flutter of curiosity about who their new neighbors would be. The neighborhood had a good mix of young families and older couples, people who looked out for each other and gathered for the occasional block party or impromptu front yard conversation. Later that evening, while she and David were grilling vegetables for dinner on their back deck, they got their first glimpse of their new neighbor. Through the fence that separated their yards, they could see a woman unpacking boxes on her back porch. She looked to be around 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of effortless style that suggested confidence without trying too hard. She was wearing jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes, even from a distance. When she noticed them watching, she waved with genuine friendliness and called out that she hoped they didn't mind having a new neighbor who was apparently incapable of moving without creating complete chaos. David, being David, immediately invited her over for dinner. That was one of the things Sarah had always loved about her husband, his instinctive hospitality and genuine interest in other people. He believed that sharing a meal was the fastest way to turn strangers into friends, and he was usually right. The woman, whose name was Emma, accepted gratefully, explaining that she had been living on takeout and granola bars for 3 days straight. Emma turned out to be a freelance photographer who specialized in capturing natural moments for families, the kind of photographer who could make even the most camera-shy children relax and smile genuinely. She had moved to Portland from San Francisco, drawn by the city's creative energy and the opportunity to start fresh after ending a long-term relationship that had simply run its course. She was funny and warm, with stories about the adventures and disasters of being a traveling photographer, like the wedding where she had to hide behind a tree during a sudden downpour, or the family portrait session where the dog decided to chase a squirrel right as she was taking the perfect shot. Sarah liked Emma immediately. There was something authentic about her, a lack of pretense that made conversation easy and natural. She asked thoughtful questions about Sarah's work and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about the challenges and rewards of being a counselor. When Sarah mentioned how difficult it could be to leave work at work, Emma shared her own struggles with the irregular schedule and emotional intensity of photographing people during some of the most important moments of their lives. They discovered a shared love of hiking and independent bookstores, and by the end of the evening, Sarah felt like she had made a real friend. David seemed equally charmed by Emma's presence. He asked her about her photography and listened intently as she described the technical and artistic challenges of capturing authentic emotion. When she mentioned that she was still getting familiar with the best locations around Portland for outdoor shoots, David immediately offered to show her some of his favorite spots in the city, places he had discovered during his years of exploring neighborhoods for architectural inspiration. Sarah watched this exchange with appreciation for her husband's kindness and genuine interest in helping their new neighbor feel welcome. Over the following weeks, Emma became a regular presence in their lives in the most natural way possible. She would knock on their door to borrow a cup of sugar or ask if they had a screwdriver she could use for hanging pictures. Sometimes Sarah would find her and David chatting over the fence while he watered their garden, and she tended to the small herb plot she was starting in her backyard. Emma would often join them for their Sunday morning coffee ritual on the front porch, bringing fresh pastries from the bakery down the street and stories about her week that made them both laugh. Sarah appreciated having another woman nearby, especially one who understood the particular challenges of building a career that required both creative and emotional intelligence. They started taking walks together on weekend mornings, exploring different neighborhoods, and talking about everything from photography techniques to relationship dynamics to their shared concern about finding work-life balance in careers that could easily consume every waking hour. Emma was a good listener, offering insights that came from her own experiences without trying to fix problems that Sarah simply needed to voice and process. It was during one of these walks, about 2 months after Emma had moved in, that Sarah first noticed a shift in the dynamic between her husband and their new neighbor. They had stopped at a coffee shop in the Alberta district, sitting outside in the morning sun while Emma showed them pictures from a recent wedding she had photographed. David was leaning closer to see the images on Emma's camera screen, and Sarah noticed how his attention seemed completely focused on Emma's explanation of how she had captured certain moments. There was an intensity to his listening that felt different from his usual polite interest in other people's work. When Emma excused herself to use the restroom, David continued looking at the camera, scrolling through more images without permission. It struck Sarah as slightly inappropriate, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. When Emma returned, she didn't seem bothered by his curiosity, but there was something in the way she smiled at him, a warmth that lasted just a beat longer than necessary, that made Sarah feel an unfamiliar flutter of unease. That evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, David mentioned how talented Emma was and how impressed he was with her ability to capture such genuine emotions in her photographs. Sarah agreed, but when she tried to change the subject to their plans for the upcoming weekend, David circled back to Emma's work, wondering aloud whether she might be interested in photographing some of his architectural projects. Sarah found herself feeling slightly irritated by his preoccupation, though she told herself she was being unnecessarily sensitive. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began noticing other small changes in their routine. David, who had always been content with their quiet evenings at home, suddenly seemed more interested in spending time in the front yard or working on projects that happened to put him outside when Emma was likely to be around. He started offering to help with things she hadn't asked for assistance with, like carrying her photography equipment to her car or offering to fix a loose board on her back fence. These gestures were entirely in character for David, who had always been helpful and neighborly, but there was a frequency and eagerness to his offers that felt different. Sarah also noticed that Emma had begun appearing more often when David was outside, timing her own yard work or trips to her car in a way that seemed designed to create opportunities for casual conversation. Again, this could have been entirely innocent, the natural result of two people who enjoyed each other's company and happened to be neighbors. But Sarah's professional training had taught her to pay attention to patterns, to notice when behavior changes suggest shifts in underlying emotions or motivations. The first time Sarah felt truly concerned was on a Thursday evening in early summer. She had gotten home late from a particularly difficult day at work, involving a family session where she had helped mediate between parents and their teenage daughter, who was struggling with anxiety and self-harm. These sessions always left Sarah emotionally depleted, grateful for the quiet sanctuary of home and David's understanding presence. But when she pulled into their driveway, she could hear laughter coming from their backyard, voices that clearly belonged to David and Emma. Sarah found them sitting on their back deck, sharing what appeared to be their second bottle of wine, based on the empty bottle sitting on the table between them. Emma was telling a story that involved elaborate gestures and expressions, while David laughed in a way that Sarah hadn't heard in months, uninhibited and genuinely delighted. They both looked up when Sarah appeared, their faces flushed with wine and laughter, and while they both greeted her warmly and invited her to join them, Sarah felt like she was interrupting something private and intimate. Emma explained that she had stopped by to return a book Sarah had lent her, and David had invited her to stay for a drink. One drink had led to another, as it sometimes does when conversation flows easily and time seems to disappear. Sarah accepted a glass of wine and tried to enter the spirit of their conversation, but she felt emotionally drained and somehow separate from their easy intimacy. After about an hour, Emma announced that she should head home, thanking them both for their hospitality and hugging Sarah goodbye with what seemed like genuine warmth and affection. After Emma left, David seemed unusually energetic and talkative, describing Emma's stories and insights in detail, praising her intelligence and humor. Sarah found herself feeling oddly jealous of his enthusiasm, wondering when he had last spoken about her with such obvious admiration. When she mentioned feeling tired and suggested they head inside, David seemed disappointed, as if he had wanted to continue reliving the evening's conversation. That night, lying in bed while David slept peacefully beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was bothering her so much. Emma was wonderful. David was being friendly, and Sarah knew she was probably reading too much into innocent interactions. But something felt different in her marriage, a subtle shift in energy and attention that she couldn't ignore. David's focus seemed to be drifting towards something outside their relationship, and while Sarah couldn't prove anything inappropriate was happening, her instincts were telling her to pay closer attention. The confirmation of her concerns came gradually, through small observations that accumulated like drops of water, eventually forming a flood. David started mentioning Emma more frequently in casual conversation, sharing her opinions about books or movies or local restaurants, with the kind of detail that suggested he was paying very close attention to everything she said. He began suggesting activities that would naturally include Emma, like hosting barbecues or organizing group hikes, always framing these invitations as neighborly gestures rather than opportunities to spend more time with her specifically. Sarah also noticed changes in David's appearance and behavior that seemed designed to impress. He started caring more about his clothes, choosing shirts that brought out his eyes and wearing cologne on days when he would be working in the yard. He became more conscious of his physical fitness, joining a gym and developing a running routine that happened to coincide with Emma's daily photography walks around the neighborhood. These changes could have been entirely unrelated to Emma's presence, but the timing felt too coincidental for Sarah's comfort. The most telling sign, however, was the way David's attention to Sarah began to fade. He seemed distracted during their conversations, responding with generic comments that showed he wasn't fully listening. Their physical intimacy, which had always been warm and consistent, became less frequent and felt somehow perfunctory when it did happen. David was present in body but seemed absent in spirit, as if his emotional energy was being directed elsewhere. Sarah tried talking to David about her concerns, approaching the subject carefully and without accusation. She mentioned feeling like they had been spending less quality time together lately and asked if he was feeling satisfied in their marriage. David reassured her that everything was fine, attributing any distance to work stress and promising to be more attentive. But his reassurances felt hollow, like responses he thought she wanted to hear rather than genuine reflections of his feelings. The situation came to a head on a Saturday morning in late July. Sarah woke up early, as she often did on weekends, and made herself coffee before settling on their front porch to enjoy the quiet morning hours. From where she sat, she could see into Emma's front yard, and she was surprised to see David emerge from Emma's front door, carrying 2 coffee cups and looking relaxed and comfortable in a way that suggested this was not his first early morning visit. Sarah watched as David and Emma sat on Emma's front steps, their heads bent close together as they talked, sharing what appeared to be an intimate conversation. They weren't touching, but there was an ease and familiarity between them that spoke of emotional intimacy. She felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally acknowledge something you've been trying not to see. Her marriage was in crisis, and while she didn't yet know the full extent of David's involvement with Emma, she knew that their relationship had crossed lines that couldn't easily be uncrossed. When David finally returned home, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, but fully alert and ready for a conversation she had been dreading. David seemed surprised to see her awake, explaining casually that he had run into Emma while getting the newspaper, and she had invited him for coffee. His explanation felt rehearsed, too smooth and casual for a man who had just spent 2 hours in intimate conversation with another woman. Sarah looked at her husband, this man she had loved and trusted for 9 years, and realized that he had been lying to her probably for weeks or even months. The lies might have been small, omissions and explanations that weren't quite the whole truth, but they represented a fundamental betrayal of the honesty and transparency that had always been the foundation of their relationship. Instead of confronting him immediately, Sarah decided to wait and observe, hoping that David would find the courage to tell her the truth himself. She spent the next 2 weeks paying careful attention to his behavior, documenting in her own mind the patterns of deception and emotional distance that had become their new normal. David continued seeing Emma, though he tried to be more discreet about it, fabricating errands and excuses that would put him in her vicinity. The final straw came when Sarah discovered a text message conversation between David and Emma that he had forgotten to delete from his phone. She hadn't been snooping, but his phone had buzzed while he was in the shower, and the message preview was visible on the screen. It was from Emma, thanking him for a wonderful evening and saying she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. The tone was intimate and warm, the kind of message you send to someone who has become important to you in a way that goes beyond friendship. Sarah realized that her husband was having an emotional affair, and possibly a physical one as well. The man she had trusted with her heart, her future, and her dreams was giving his attention and affection to another woman, lying to Sarah's face while maintaining the pretense of their marriage. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of what David was doing, but because of how skillfully he was hiding it, how easily he was able to look her in the eye and pretend that nothing had changed. That night, after David fell asleep, Sarah sat in their living room and tried to decide what to do. She could confront him directly, demanding the truth and hoping they could work through whatever had gone wrong in their marriage. She could ignore what was happening and hope that David's infatuation with Emma would burn itself out naturally. Or she could prepare herself for the possibility that her marriage was over and start making decisions based on that reality. Sarah's training as a counselor had taught her that trust, once broken, is extremely difficult to rebuild, especially when the betrayal involves emotional intimacy with someone else. She had helped many couples navigate infidelity, and she knew that successful reconciliation required the unfaithful partner to be completely honest, genuinely remorseful, and willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust over time. Looking at David, watching him sleep peacefully beside her while carrying on a secret relationship with another woman, Sarah doubted whether he possessed any of those qualities. More importantly, Sarah realized that her own feelings had changed dramatically over the past few months. The woman who had once felt completely secure in David's love now felt like a stranger in her own marriage, constantly wondering what was true and what was performance. The easy intimacy and trust that had been the hallmark of their relationship was gone, replaced by suspicion and emotional distance that felt impossible to bridge. The conversation that would change everything happened on a Sunday morning in early August. David had been unusually distant and preoccupied for several days, checking his phone constantly and seeming anxious in a way that was unlike his normally calm demeanor. Sarah was reading on the front porch when David joined her, sitting down heavily in the chair beside her and letting out a deep sigh that suggested he had something important to say. For a moment, Sarah hoped that David was going to confess everything and ask for her forgiveness, that they could finally address what had been happening and find a way forward together. Instead, David began a carefully prepared speech about feeling confused about their relationship and needing some space to figure out what he really wanted. He talked about feeling trapped by their routine and wondering whether they had simply settled into marriage because it was comfortable, rather than because it was truly right for both of them. Sarah listened to this speech with growing incredulity, recognizing it as an elaborate justification for what David had already been doing behind her back. He was asking for permission to explore his feelings for Emma while keeping Sarah as a backup option in case things didn't work out. The audacity and selfishness of his request took her breath away. But what hurt even more was his apparent belief that she would agree to this arrangement. When David finished speaking, he looked at Sarah expectantly, as if he genuinely believed she might give him her blessing to date another woman while remaining married to her. Sarah stared at her husband, this man who had once promised to love and honor her for the rest of his life, and realized that she no longer recognized the person he had become. The David she had married would never have asked her to accept such a humiliating and heartbreaking arrangement. Instead of responding immediately, Sarah stood up and went inside, leaving David sitting alone on the porch. She needed time to process what he had just asked of her and to decide how she wanted to respond. In her heart, she already knew that their marriage was over, but she wanted to handle the situation with dignity and clarity rather than reacting from a place of anger and hurt. Sarah spent the next hour walking through their neighborhood, thinking about the life she and David had built together and acknowledging that it was time to let it go. She thought about the woman she had been when she married David, full of hope and trust and faith in their shared future. That woman deserved better than a husband who would ask her to step aside while he pursued another woman. The woman she was now, stronger and wiser after years of helping other people navigate their most difficult moments, deserved better too. When Sarah returned home, David was still sitting on the porch, looking anxious and uncertain. Sarah sat down across from him and spoke with the calm authority that came from years of training and experience in helping people face difficult truths. She told David that she understood he was confused about their relationship and she wanted to help him find clarity. She would agree to give him the space he was asking for, but with one condition. He needed to move out of their house while he figured out what he wanted. David looked surprised, as if he had expected to continue living with Sarah while exploring his relationship with Emma. Sarah explained that if he needed space to think about their marriage, he needed actual space, not the convenience of maintaining their domestic arrangements while pursuing another woman. She offered to help him find a temporary place to stay and suggested they separate their finances until he made a final decision about their future. The generosity and reasonableness of Sarah's response seemed to catch David off guard. He had clearly expected anger, tears, and accusations, not this calm, practical approach to separation. Sarah could see him struggling to reconcile her mature response with whatever narrative he had constructed to justify his behavior. When he asked if she was sure this was what she wanted, Sarah assured him that it was the fairest solution for both of them. Over the next few days, David made arrangements to stay with a friend while he sorted out his feelings. Sarah helped him pack his belongings, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor that kept their interactions focused on practical matters rather than emotional recriminations. She didn't ask him about Emma directly, though she noticed that he seemed relieved and almost excited about his newfound freedom. After David moved out, Sarah experienced a complex mix of emotions. The grief and sense of loss were intense, made worse by the way their marriage had ended with a whimper rather than an honest confrontation about David's infidelity. But alongside the sadness was an unexpected sense of relief, as if she had been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. The constant tension and uncertainty that had characterized their relationship in recent months was gone, replaced by a painful but clean clarity about where things stood. The experience of betrayal and recovery also transformed Sarah's approach to her work as a counselor in profound ways. Before her divorce, she had helped many clients navigate relationship problems and infidelity, but her understanding had been primarily theoretical and empathetic rather than experiential. Now, having lived through the complex emotions and difficult decisions that accompany marital betrayal, Sarah brought a new depth of understanding and authenticity to her work that made her even more effective as a therapist. When working with clients who had discovered their partner's infidelity, Sarah could speak from experience about the disorienting effect of realizing that someone you trusted completely had been lying to you for months. She understood the way betrayal makes you question not just your relationship, but your own judgment and ability to perceive reality accurately. She could validate her client's confusion and self-doubt because she had experienced those same feelings herself. More importantly, Sarah could offer hope to clients who felt like their world had completely fallen apart because she had walked the path from devastation to healing and emerged stronger on the other side. She could describe with authentic conviction how the skills that seemed impossible to imagine in the immediate aftermath of betrayal, like trusting again and feeling genuinely happy, would gradually return as part of the healing process. Sarah found particular fulfillment in working with women who were struggling to decide whether to stay in marriages marked by emotional infidelity or other forms of betrayal. She could help them explore their options without pushing them toward any particular outcome. Understanding that each person's situation was unique and required different responses, some clients chose to work on rebuilding their marriages, while others decided to leave, and Sarah supported both choices as potentially healthy responses to difficult circumstances. One client, Maria, was particularly memorable for Sarah because her situation so closely paralleled Sarah's own experience. Maria's husband had developed an emotional affair with a coworker and was asking for a trial separation to explore his feelings. Maria was torn between her desire to save her marriage and her growing awareness that accepting such an arrangement would compromise her self-respect and dignity. Working with Maria, Sarah was able to share insights that came directly from her own experience while still maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. She helped Maria explore what it might mean to agree to her husband's request and what it might cost her psychologically to remain in a relationship where she felt like she was competing for her partner's attention and affection. When Maria ultimately decided to end her marriage rather than accept a trial separation, Sarah was able to support her through the grieving process with genuine understanding of what that decision required. Sarah's own journey through divorce provided a roadmap for Maria, showing her that it was possible to rebuild a meaningful and happy life even after such a profound loss. The authenticity and depth that Sarah's personal experience brought to her professional work didn't go unnoticed by her colleagues and supervisors. Within 6 months of her divorce being finalized, Sarah was asked to develop and lead workshops for other mental health professionals on helping clients navigate infidelity and relationship transitions. These workshops drew from both her clinical training and her personal experience, offering practical strategies for supporting clients while also addressing the emotional challenges that therapists face when working with relationship trauma. Sarah also began writing articles for professional journals about the intersection of personal and professional growth, exploring how therapists can use their own experiences of loss and recovery to become more effective helpers without compromising professional boundaries. Her writing was well received by the mental health community, establishing her as a thoughtful voice on issues related to relationship trauma and recovery. The increased recognition and opportunities that came with Sarah's growing expertise in relationship trauma helped her feel purposeful and valued in ways that extended far beyond her personal relationships. She discovered that her painful experience with David's betrayal had prepared her to make unique contributions to her field, turning her personal suffering into a source of healing and insight for others. This transformation of pain into purpose became a central theme in Sarah's understanding of her own healing journey. Rather than viewing her divorce as purely a loss or failure, she began to see it as an experience that had deepened her capacity for empathy, strengthened her commitment to authenticity, and clarified her values in ways that made her both a better therapist and a better person. Sarah's growing reputation as an expert on relationship trauma also led to invitations to speak at conferences and workshops for the general public. She developed presentations for women's groups, church communities, and other organizations about recognizing the signs of emotional betrayal and developing the courage to advocate for yourself in relationships. These speaking engagements allowed Sarah to reach people who might not otherwise have access to professional counseling, sharing insights and strategies that could help them navigate their own relationship challenges. The response to these presentations was often overwhelming, with audience members approaching Sarah afterward to share their own stories of betrayal, confusion, and difficult decisions about whether to stay or leave troubled relationships. Sarah realized that her experience, while painful, had given her the ability to offer hope and practical guidance to people who were facing some of the most difficult decisions of their lives. These interactions with community members also reinforced Sarah's understanding of how common relationship betrayal really is, and how many people suffer in silence because they feel ashamed or confused about their situations. By sharing her story openly and honestly, Sarah helped normalize the experience of relationship trauma and made it easier for others to seek help and support when they needed it. The professional growth and recognition that emerged from Sarah's personal experience created a positive feedback loop that supported her continued healing and development. As she helped others navigate similar challenges, she reinforced her own learning and continued to process her own experience in new ways. Each client she worked with, each workshop she led, and each article she wrote contributed to her understanding of her own journey and her confidence in the choices she had made. Working with clients who were in various stages of dealing with relationship betrayal also helped Sarah appreciate the wisdom of her own decision to leave her marriage rather than accept David's proposed arrangement. She saw how clients who chose to stay in relationships marked by ongoing deception and disrespect often struggled with depression, anxiety, and eroded self-esteem. While some couples were able to rebuild trust and create healthier relationships after infidelity, this outcome required the unfaithful partner to be genuinely committed to change and rebuilding trust. Observing clients whose partners continued to be dishonest, manipulative, or unwilling to take full responsibility for their betrayals reinforced Sarah's belief that she had made the right choice in refusing to tolerate David's emotional infidelity. She could see how accepting such behavior would have damaged her psychological well-being and set a precedent for further disrespect in their relationship. Sarah's professional development during this period also included additional training in trauma therapy and specialized approaches to helping people recover from betrayal. She completed certification programs in EMDR and other trauma-informed therapies, recognizing that relationship betrayal often creates symptoms similar to other forms of trauma. This additional training enhanced her ability to help clients process the complex emotions and psychological effects of infidelity and relationship loss. The combination of personal experience and enhanced professional training made Sarah particularly effective at helping clients understand that their intense emotional reactions to betrayal were normal and appropriate responses to genuine trauma. She could validate their feelings while also providing hope that healing was possible and specific strategies for moving through the recovery process. Sarah's deepening expertise in relationship trauma also led to opportunities to consult with other therapists who were working with particularly challenging cases involving infidelity and relationship betrayal. These consultations allowed Sarah to share her insights with colleagues while continuing to learn from their experiences and perspectives. The collaborative nature of this work reinforced Sarah's sense of professional competence and contribution to her field. As Sarah's second year of being divorced progressed, she realized that her professional identity had become deeply intertwined with her personal experience of betrayal and recovery. Rather than feeling like her divorce was something she needed to hide or minimize, she had learned to see it as a source of wisdom and authenticity that enhanced her ability to help others. This integration of personal and professional growth represented a significant milestone in her healing journey. About 3 weeks after David moved out, Sarah received a text message from him asking if they could meet for coffee to talk about their future. Sarah agreed, though she approached the meeting with realistic expectations about what David might want to discuss. When they met at a coffee shop downtown, David looked tired and somewhat deflated. Lacking the excited energy he had shown when first asking for space, David began by telling Sarah that he missed her and their life together, that the freedom he had thought he wanted felt empty and confusing. He admitted that he had been spending time with Emma, though he stopped short of providing details about the nature of their relationship. He said he realized now that he had made a mistake in asking for space and wondered whether they could work things out. Sarah listened to David's speech with the same calm attention she brought to her work with clients, but inside she felt nothing but sadness for the man he had become. When David, she didn't, Sarah, David looked, he asked Sarah, she wished the divorce, they divided. Sarah wore a simple navy dress and her grandmother's pearl necklace, drawing strength from the women who had come before her and survived their own heartbreaks with grace and dignity. David looked uncomfortable in his suit, glancing frequently at Sarah as if he still couldn't quite believe this was really happening. When the judge declared their marriage officially dissolved, Sarah felt a sense of closure and peace that had been missing from her life for months. She was no longer married to a man who had chosen someone else over their shared history and promises. She was free to build a life based on her own values and priorities, free to find someone who would choose her every day without reservation or doubt. As Sarah walked out of the courthouse that morning, she thought about the woman she had been when she first met David 9 years earlier. That woman had been looking for someone to share her life with, someone who would appreciate her kindness and emotional intelligence and choose her above all others. The woman Sarah had become through this experience was stronger and wiser, no longer willing to settle for a relationship that required her to compete for attention and affection. Sarah never learned the full details of David's relationship with Emma, and she realized she didn't need to know. Whether their connection was purely emotional or had become physical, whether it lasted or burned out quickly, was no longer her concern. What mattered was that David had shown his true character when faced with temptation, and Sarah had shown hers when faced with betrayal. In the months following her divorce, Sarah focused on rebuilding her life according to her own vision and values. She redecorated the house they had shared, replacing furniture and artwork that reminded her of their marriage with pieces that reflected her individual taste and personality. She traveled to places David had never been interested in visiting, took classes in photography and cooking, and gradually built a social circle that didn't include people who knew her primarily as half of a couple. The most important change in Sarah's life was learning to trust her own instincts and value her own worth. The experience of watching her marriage crumble had taught her that love without respect and honesty is ultimately meaningless, that sharing a life with someone requires more than affection and compatibility. It requires commitment, integrity, and the willingness to choose your partner every day, even when other options present themselves. Sarah's story is both heartbreaking and inspiring because it reminds us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from relationships that no longer serve us. It takes courage to admit when something we've invested years of our lives in isn't working. Even more courage to take action to change our circumstances rather than hoping things will improve on their own. For women who have experienced similar betrayals, Sarah's journey offers a roadmap for moving forward with dignity and strength. Her decision to refuse David's request to maintain their marriage while he explored other options showed incredible self-respect and wisdom. She recognized that accepting such an arrangement would have damaged her self-esteem and set a precedent for future disrespect. Sarah's willingness to let David go, even though she still loved him, demonstrates the difference between loving someone and loving yourself enough to demand better treatment. She understood that sometimes love means releasing someone who has shown they don't appreciate what they have, rather than fighting to hold on to a relationship that has become one-sided. The counseling skills that served Sarah so well in her professional life also helped her navigate her personal crisis with unusual clarity and emotional intelligence. She was able to recognize the patterns of behavior that indicated David's emotional affair, process her own feelings without losing sight of reality, and make decisions based on her long-term well-being rather than short-term emotional impulses. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story illustrates the power of self-respect in relationships. By refusing to accept a situation that diminished her worth and dignity, she demonstrated that she valued herself enough to demand better treatment. This self-respect ultimately protected her from further emotional damage and allowed her to move forward with her life rather than remaining trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying her confidence and happiness. The aftermath of Sarah's divorce brought unexpected gifts, along with the predictable challenges. Without the emotional energy that had been consumed by trying to save her marriage, Sarah found herself more present and effective in her work as a counselor. Her personal experience with betrayal and recovery gave her deeper empathy for clients facing similar challenges, and she was able to help them navigate their situations with wisdom earned through her own journey. Sarah also discovered aspects of herself that had been dormant during her marriage, interests, and dreams that she had set aside to focus on building a life with David. She began taking weekend photography workshops, inspired partly by Emma's artistic passion but determined to explore her own creative vision. She started a small garden in her backyard, finding peace and satisfaction in nurturing growing things. She reconnected with college friends who had drifted away during the years when her social life revolved around couple activities. Most surprisingly, Sarah found that she enjoyed living alone in a way she had never expected. The house that had once felt empty without David gradually became a sanctuary that reflected her personality and provided exactly the kind of peace and beauty she needed. She could pursue her own interests without negotiating or compromising, eat what she wanted when she wanted, and create an environment that supported her emotional and spiritual growth. The healing process wasn't linear or easy, and Sarah discovered that recovery from betrayal involves layers of grief that reveal themselves gradually over time. Some days she felt strong and confident in her decision, celebrating small victories like successfully assembling furniture by herself or enjoying a solo dinner at a restaurant she and David used to frequent together. Other days, seemingly random triggers would send her spiraling into sadness or rage, reminding her that emotional wounds heal at their own pace, not according to any timeline we might prefer. The first few months after David moved out were particularly challenging because everything in their shared home carried memories of their life together. The kitchen table where they had eaten countless meals and shared their daily stories suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The bed they had shared for years felt enormous and cold, making sleep difficult and restless. Even simple tasks like grocery shopping became emotionally loaded experiences, as Sarah found herself reaching for foods David enjoyed before remembering that she no longer needed to consider his preferences. Sarah learned to be patient with her own healing process, understanding that grief doesn't follow a neat progression from pain to acceptance. Some mornings she would wake up feeling optimistic and grateful for her freedom, only to find herself sobbing in the shower an hour later after discovering one of David's socks behind the washing machine. These emotional whiplashes were exhausting and confusing, making her question whether she was handling her divorce with appropriate strength and maturity. During this period, Sarah began seeing a therapist herself, recognizing that even mental health professionals need support during major life transitions. Dr. Patricia Williams was an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle approach that helped Sarah process her complex feelings without judgment. In therapy, Sarah explored not just her anger and sadness about David's betrayal, but also her own patterns in relationships and the ways her childhood experiences had shaped her expectations about love and partnership. Through these sessions, Sarah began to understand how her role as the family peacemaker during her parents' tumultuous marriage had prepared her to overlook warning signs and prioritize harmony over honesty in her own relationship. She realized that her natural empathy and desire to understand other people's perspectives, while valuable in her work as a counselor, had sometimes prevented her from trusting her own instincts when something felt wrong in her marriage. Williams helped Sarah see that her response to David's request for space had actually been incredibly wise and self-protective, even though it had felt scary and uncertain at the time. By refusing to accept a situation that diminished her worth and allowing David to experience the consequences of his choices, Sarah had protected herself from further emotional damage and created the possibility for genuine healing and growth. The therapy process also helped Sarah identify patterns of behavior that she wanted to change in future relationships. She had always been quick to accommodate other people's needs and preferences, sometimes at the expense of her own well-being. She realized that her fear of conflict had led her to suppress concerns and complaints that might have been important to address earlier in her marriage. Learning to voice her needs and boundaries clearly became a crucial part of her healing journey. Sarah also discovered that she had been carrying a deep-seated belief that love required sacrifice and that healthy relationships involved one person giving up parts of themselves for the other's happiness. Through therapy and her own reflection, she began to understand that genuine partnership actually involves two whole, healthy individuals choosing to build something together while maintaining their individual identities and interests. The social aspects of divorce proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. While most of her friends and family members were supportive and understanding, some relationships became strained as Sarah navigated the complex dynamics of mutual friendships and family connections. A few people seemed to view her decision to divorce David as hasty or unforgiving, suggesting that she should have tried harder to work things out or been more patient with David's confusion about what he wanted. These comments, however well-intentioned, were particularly painful because they seemed to misunderstand the extent of Sarah's efforts to save her marriage and the depth of David's betrayal. Sarah had spent months trying to address the distance and disconnection in their relationship before David's emotional affair became undeniable. She had been patient, understanding, and willing to work on their problems until David asked her to accept an arrangement that would have required her to tolerate ongoing emotional infidelity. Learning to respond to these judgmental comments became another aspect of Sarah's growth and healing. She practiced explaining her decision in terms that protected her privacy while helping others understand that her choice was based on careful consideration rather than impulsive anger. She also learned to set boundaries with people who seemed more interested in gossiping about her situation than offering genuine support. One of the most difficult aspects of the healing process was letting go of the future Sarah had imagined with David. They had talked about traveling together after retirement, about the children they might have someday, about growing old together in the house they had lovingly restored. Grieving these lost possibilities felt almost as painful as grieving the relationship itself, because it meant acknowledging that an entire imagined life would never come to pass. Sarah found herself going through what felt like multiple deaths: the death of her marriage, the death of her identity as David's wife, the death of her faith in David's character, and the death of all the shared dreams and plans they had made together. Each of these losses required its own period of mourning, its own process of acceptance and release. The holidays during Sarah's first year of being divorced were particularly challenging, as they highlighted the changes in her life and forced her to create new traditions and routines. Thanksgiving had always been spent with David's family, who had welcomed Sarah warmly and treated her like a daughter. Christmas had involved elaborate gift exchanges and carefully planned meals that reflected both their family traditions. These celebrations, which had once brought joy and connection, now served as painful reminders of everything she had lost. Rather than wallowing in loneliness during these difficult times, Sarah chose to create new traditions that reflected her current reality and supported her healing process. She volunteered at a local shelter on Thanksgiving, serving meals to people who were also spending the holiday away from family. She traveled to visit college friends during Christmas, allowing herself to be cared for and celebrated by people who loved her unconditionally. These new experiences taught Sarah that holidays and traditions are ultimately about connection and gratitude, rather than specific locations or activities. She discovered that she could create meaningful celebrations that honored her values and brought her joy, even without the familiar routines she had shared with David. The financial aspects of divorce also required significant adjustment and learning. Sarah had always been responsible with money, but she had shared financial decisions with David for so many years that managing everything independently felt overwhelming at first. She had to learn about insurance policies, retirement accounts, and investment options that David had previously handled. She also had to adjust her budget to reflect her new reality as a single person with only one income. Rather than viewing these challenges as burdens, Sarah chose to see them as opportunities to develop skills and independence she had previously lacked. She took a financial planning course, read books about investing and retirement planning, and gradually built confidence in her ability to make sound financial decisions. The sense of competence and self-reliance she developed through managing her own finances became an important part of her growing self-confidence and independence. Physical health also became a priority during Sarah's healing journey, as she recognized the connection between emotional well-being and taking care of her body. The stress of discovering David's emotional affair and navigating their divorce had taken a toll on her sleep, appetite, and energy levels. She made conscious efforts to exercise regularly, eat nutritiously, and get adequate rest, understanding that her emotional recovery depended partly on physical self-care. Sarah discovered that hiking in the beautiful natural areas around Portland provided both physical exercise and emotional healing. The rhythmic motion of walking, combined with the beauty and tranquility of forest trails, helped her process difficult emotions and find perspective on her situation. Many of her most important insights and emotional breakthroughs occurred during these solitary walks in nature. She also began practicing yoga, drawn by its emphasis on mindfulness, breathing, and the connection between physical and emotional well-being. The yoga classes provided a community of people focused on growth and healing, and the practice itself helped Sarah develop greater awareness of her own needs and boundaries. Learning to listen to her body's signals and honor its limitations became a metaphor for listening to her emotional needs and honoring her own worth in relationships. Sarah also had to navigate the social challenges that come with divorce, particularly in a culture that often treats divorced women with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Well-meaning friends and family members offered advice about dating and moving on before Sarah was ready to consider new relationships. Others seemed to view her divorce as a cautionary tale or a personal failure, asking pointed questions about what had gone wrong and whether she had tried hard enough to save her marriage. Learning to respond to these interactions with grace and boundaries became part of Sarah's healing journey. She practiced explaining her situation in terms that protected her privacy while satisfying people's curiosity, and she gradually built confidence in her decision to prioritize her own well being over social expectations about marriage and commitment. About a year after her divorce was finalized, Sarah ran into Emma at a local farmer's market. The encounter was brief and polite, with both women acknowledging each other with neutral smiles before moving on to their respective errands. Sarah felt no anger or bitterness toward Emma, recognizing that while Emma had certainly played a role in the end of her marriage, the real responsibility lay with David, who had chosen to pursue another woman while still married. Sarah never learned whether David and Emma's relationship had lasted or what had become of their connection after the divorce. She realized that her curiosity about their situation was mostly academic, that their happiness or unhappiness had no bearing on her own life and recovery. This emotional detachment felt like a significant milestone in her healing, evidence that she had truly moved beyond her marriage and was building a new identity that didn't depend on her former relationship. 2 years after her divorce, Sarah met someone new at a continuing education workshop for mental health professionals. James was a social worker who had recently moved to Portland from Chicago, drawn by the city's commitment to community-based mental health services and its reputation for supporting innovative approaches to therapy and counseling. Their first conversation lasted through the coffee break, extended lunch, and into the evening, covering everything from their professional philosophies to their personal experiences with loss and recovery. What struck Sarah most about James was his emotional honesty and his genuine interest in understanding her perspective, rather than trying to impress her with his own insights. He listened to her stories about her work without offering unsolicited advice or trying to one-up her with his own experiences. When she mentioned that she was divorced, he responded with empathy rather than curiosity about the details, sharing that he had also experienced the end of a long-term relationship and understood how difficult it could be to rebuild trust and confidence. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, without the intensity or urgency that had characterized Sarah's connection with David. James seemed content to let their friendship evolve at its own pace, building emotional intimacy gradually through shared experiences and deepening conversations. He never pressured Sarah to move faster than felt comfortable, and he consistently demonstrated the kind of reliability and emotional availability that had been missing in her marriage. After several months of dating, Sarah realized that her relationship with James felt fundamentally different from anything she had experienced before. Where her marriage to David had been based partly on chemistry and shared dreams, her connection with James was grounded in mutual respect, emotional maturity, and genuine compatibility. They brought out the best in each other without trying to change or fix each other, supporting each other's individual growth while building something meaningful together. The contrast between her two relationships taught Sarah important lessons about the difference between love and compatibility, between attraction and genuine partnership. Her marriage to David had been intense and romantic, but it had also been somewhat unequal, with Sarah often accommodating David's needs and preferences at the expense of her own. Her relationship with James was more balanced, characterized by reciprocity and mutual consideration that made both partners feel valued and supported. Sarah's story reminds us that recovery from betrayal and divorce is not just about healing from past wounds, but about learning to recognize and create healthier relationship patterns. The pain of David's infidelity had taught Sarah to value honesty and emotional integrity above chemistry or romantic excitement. Her experience with his selfishness and manipulation had shown her the importance of finding a partner who could prioritize her well-being, even when it wasn't convenient or easy. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah had learned to trust herself in ways that she hadn't been able to do during her marriage. The months of doubting her perceptions and questioning her instincts had taught her to pay attention to her own emotional responses and to act on them even when doing so was difficult or scary. This self-trust became the foundation for all her future relationships, both romantic and platonic. Looking back on her journey from betrayal to recovery, Sarah could see how each phase had been necessary for her growth and healing. The initial shock and pain of discovering David's emotional affair had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about their relationship. The difficult months of trying to save their marriage had taught her about her own resilience and capacity for forgiveness. The decision to divorce had required her to prioritize her own well-being over social expectations and emotional attachment. The period of grieving and recovery had allowed her to rediscover parts of herself that had been neglected during her marriage, while also processing the complex emotions that come with the end of any significant relationship. Her eventual readiness to love again had shown her that healing doesn't mean becoming closed off or cynical, but rather becoming more discerning about what we're willing to accept in our relationships. Sarah's transformation from a woman who tolerated emotional betrayal to one who demanded honesty and respect represents a journey that many women will recognize and find inspiring. Her story shows that it's possible to emerge from heartbreak stronger and wiser, that the end of one relationship can become the beginning of a more authentic and fulfilling life. For women who are currently facing similar situations, Sarah's example offers both hope and practical guidance. Her willingness to trust her instincts, even when others might have advised her to be more patient or forgiving, shows the importance of honoring your own emotional truth. Her refusal to accept David's proposed arrangement demonstrates that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to participate in relationships that diminish your worth. Sarah's journey also illustrates the importance of taking time to heal and rediscover yourself after a significant loss, rather than rushing into new relationships as a way of avoiding difficult emotions. The months she spent alone, focusing on her work and personal growth, were essential preparation for her eventual ability to love again from a place of strength rather than need. Today, Sarah works as a supervisor at the counseling center, helping train new therapists while maintaining a small caseload of clients dealing with relationship issues. She often shares her story, appropriately and professionally, with clients who are struggling to find the courage to leave unhealthy relationships. Her personal experience with betrayal and recovery gives her unique credibility and insight that helps others navigate their own difficult journeys. Sarah and James have been together for 3 years now, building a relationship characterized by mutual respect, emotional honesty, and genuine partnership. They've traveled together, supported each other through professional challenges, and created a shared life that honors both their individual needs and their commitment to each other. While they've talked about marriage, they're in no rush to formalize their relationship, both understanding that true partnership is about daily choices rather than legal contracts. The house that Sarah once shared with David has been transformed into a warm, welcoming space that reflects her personal style and values. The garden she started after her divorce has flourished, providing vegetables for her table and flowers for her home. The spare bedroom has been converted into an office where she writes articles for professional journals and develops training materials for other counselors. On quiet Sunday mornings, Sarah sometimes sits on her front porch with her coffee, much as she did during those difficult months when her marriage was falling apart. But now, instead of watching for signs of her husband's betrayal, she observes the peaceful rhythms of her neighborhood with gratitude for the life she has built from the ashes of her broken marriage. Sarah's story is ultimately one of hope and empowerment, a reminder that our worst moments can become the catalysts for our greatest growth. Her journey from betrayal to healing to love shows that it's possible to emerge from heartbreak not just intact, but actually stronger and wiser than before. Her will for every sometimes Sarah's journey reminds us that we have more strength than we know, more wisdom than we trust, and more capacity for love and joy than our worst experiences might suggest. Her story in share these women, like Sarah, demonstrate that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to demand better, and never too late to build a life that reflects your deepest values and highest dreams. The courage to walk away from what isn't working, even when it means facing uncertainty and starting over, is perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves. Sarah's story shows us what that courage looks like in practice, and the beautiful life that becomes possible when we choose to honor our own worth above all else. Her journey from betrayal to healing to love again offers hope to anyone who has ever wondered whether it's possible to rebuild after heartbreak, whether it's worth the risk to demand better treatment, whether there is life and love and joy waiting on the other side of our most difficult decisions. The answer, as Sarah learned, is always yes. There is always life waiting on the other side of our courage to choose ourselves. Always love waiting for those brave enough to refuse to settle for less than they deserve. Sarah's story is a beacon of hope for anyone who needs permission to choose themselves, to walk away from what isn't working, and to trust that something better is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it.